welcome to the MSL Lead Chronicles. It's a podcast on a mission in medical affairs and leadership. I'm Mary Morton, and along with my buddy, Chad Fellers, we're going to have casual talk about important topics and challenges in leadership. So whether you want to elevate or further develop as a leader, or your ambition is to transition to a leadership role, you've tuned into the right podcast, and we are so glad you're here. Stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of MSL Lead Chronicles, where leaders learn from leaders. I'm your host, Chad Fellers, joined by my good friend, Mary Morton, and we are glad that you're here. If you haven't already, please be sure to follow the LinkedIn MSL Lead Chronicles page that we have gotten started. Mary, I'm excited about the topic that we get to dive into today. But first, it's March Madness time, so I got to know, how's your bracket shaping up?
You know what is so funny is I was going to ask you how the Razorbacks are doing so far in the tournament. We won our game last night. I didn't see what happened in the Razorbacks game.
Well, I mean, Eric Musman's done such a great job the past few years with a couple of Elite Eights, Sweet 16. And in the last 3 years, we decided to give Texas a chance this year. I mean, I don't think we played y'all in the Elite Eight the past couple of years, or Sweet 16. Did y'all make it? I'm not sure. So
I'm sure we did.
Yeah, we didn't make it. We didn't make it this year. It was a rough year. Sometimes you have a lot of talent, but you're not able to do anything with it, and that was the case this year. So there's always next year, right? At least our baseball team's #1 right now. There is that.
Number one in what?
In the US.
The Razorbacks baseball team?
Yes.
Sorry, I am only strictly following Vandergrift High School baseball. So I haven't been paying attention. So I didn't.
You do have an excuse. You do have an excuse. Well, how's that going for you so far? How's the season?
Repping them right here. Seasons go. If we just have gotten into district play, so far so good. In fact, I keep getting the updates because they have a game in Manor, which is spelled Manor, MANOR, which down here in Austin, we're on like opposite sides of town. So I'm not going to make it to see the game. So I'm going to watch it on the old Game Changer.
Well, make sure you put it on mute, because I think you have a version now that you can actually listen to it, or it tells you the little ball and strike and all that kind of stuff. It's fun. I'm glad you can at least have that available to you to make it. So anyway, you ready to dig in today?
Let's get into it.
All right, here we go. To measure or not to measure? That is the question. Let's talk about metrics. What do you think?
Metrics, I often refer to that as the 4-letter, 7-letter word.
Is that one of our key takeaways? Because you're gonna have to tell me what those are.
What 4-letter words are?
Yeah.
The boo-boo words, bad words. Is what whenever we're talking to candidates and they're like, that's a question I'm going to ask in the interview. I'm going to ask about metrics. We're like, ooh, it's such a controversial topic.
It is.
Can you ask that question without using the 4-letter, 7-letter word? Yeah.
But it's what everybody wants. It's what every MSL wants to know, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true.
It's the question behind the question. I actually was in an interview earlier this week with a candidate, and that question did come up too. I can't remember how it was phrased. It was actually done in a really pretty nice way. Something about, what are your expectations, or what would good look like on a monthly basis as we have our one-on-one conversations when it comes to activity, or something like that. I think is the way.
That's a good way to.
Yeah. So
why is it? So why is it the 4-letter, 7-letter word? Maybe we'll get into it.
Well, yeah, that's what we're going to get into today. I can't wait to get your thoughts on it and the discussion, and can't wait to get feedback from all the listeners out there on our LinkedIn page. please make sure you comment and give us your thoughts as well too. I'm sure this is a subject that everyone has a good opinion on. But true to fashion, why don't we start with the key takeaways? I've got a couple for you if you want me to share them.
Let's hear them.
All right, here we go. Number one, metrics are beneficial if used as an indicator and not the core goal. Number two, metrics complement, not replace human judgment. So those are the two key takeaways, and hopefully that's a teaser in case you want to know more as we dig in today for today's topic. So if you only have time for that, I hope that you will come back and listen to more. So why don't we get going? So Mary, why do we have metrics? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a loaded question because the answer to that is different from organization to organization in pharma, as I understand. But I think by definition, metrics are intended to measure someone's progress or their success. But then you have to define success to be able to backtrack and define what those metrics should be. But yeah, I mean, I know you and I've talked about this before. I have metrics more for a diagnostic, maybe where things may be hitting the skids a little bit, or as a Nostradamus predictor, because I can usually kind of predict what things are going to look like for us 8 to 10 weeks in the future based on numbers from today. But I mean, I don't manage people by them exactly, but that's what I use them for. What about you? What do you think?
So let me take a step back. I always do. It's not one of those things where I like just to give a quick answer. And I'm going to do it because I know we're limited in our time from a podcast standpoint. But it all goes back to my world got rocked, I guess, when it comes to metrics. When I read the book, The Tyranny of Metrics by Jerry Muller. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen or read the book. For those that are listening, I would highly encourage this. It really shaped my thoughts on metrics, and there's some great points, and a lot of these things that were covered in the book I want to share today. One around the idea of metric fixation. But before I do, I'll answer your question. Really, what I found, metrics, I think, like you, they're more from a diagnostic standpoint than they are a true measure of a goal. In the right place, I think metrics can be very beneficial. So, but I do want to go first into this topic around metric fixation. So this is the phrase that he utilized. In essence, the book highlights a pattern called metric fixation. He defines it as it's this fixation that revolves around the belief that numerical indicators or metrics can replace judgment based on experience and talent. It assumes this. So it assumes that everything or anything measurable can be improved, leading to an over-reliance on quantification. Thinking through that, I think when we are applying that in the context of medical affairs, I think that if we are being honest with ourselves, that is what we are guilty of in many ways. We go back to it being first, the core goal, or instead of an indicator, and then how can we rely on this to be the accurate measure of the value that we bring? And it all translates to quantification versus qualification. So I thought it was a fascinating comment. Metric fixation. What are your thoughts?
I like the term, and I'm glad you kind of explained it a little bit more. And it's kind of self-explanatory, I guess, but just hearing it in more terms, it just paints a better picture. I think it's not just your world, in field medical, but I think there are a lot of areas where you get kind of stuck on those numbers, for no reason other than, the company I worked at right before Nicole and I started Symbio was very much about that. And I'll elaborate if the conversation goes there, but suffice it to say, I disagreed strongly with that because I thought it impaired the value and the quality of what we were really trying to accomplish.
So yeah, that kind of, I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So I think when we talk about it, going back to that, anchoring it on the core goal versus an indicator. I think again, many times I've seen even MSLs focus on achieving a metric. That's the first thing out of their mouth, right? Is okay, so just tell me what is expected of me from an activity standpoint to measure if I'm doing the job well. And certainly that, let's be clear, activity is required to be able to make an impact, but we go back to what is medical affairs, what's the ultimate purpose? And it's really any healthcare provider, our goal is to improve patient outcomes, patients, if you will. Where can I make that impact? Instead, it's starting with, okay, I've got to meet this many people in a certain amounts to show that I've done well in my job. So I think when that happens, and I think you would probably agree with that, there's pitfalls that come with that. I think you can narrow it down to a couple of different things. So first, one would be the focus becomes very narrow. So it causes really the decision makers, leadership to ignore other goals and just focus on the things that are easily measured in the sense of reach and frequency, I think is one that's pretty common. The length of calls at times can be one, the number of resources at the time that is open, et cetera, but it doesn't really articulate the value that was brought there. So it really narrows the focus of an interaction with a healthcare provider. The second would be gaming the stats. I think that if you give an MSL a metric, they're going to find a way to meet the number. But how does that really tell what value has been brought? So
I hear that almost daily when I'm talking to somebody about an opportunity and they're like, well, what are their metrics? And, fortunately, I work with a lot of companies that are, let me step back for a second. You have to have metrics. You have to have something. My personal opinion is that you can't, the whole, it can't just be about metrics and nothing else. But, so, in having those discussions, they almost always say what you just said, which is, if you give me a number, I'll hit it. I will hit it any way I can if I have to, but I can't promise you any value because I'm so focused on these numbers. And then the point I was thinking about earlier about the company I'd worked with before we started Symbio, the owner of the company one time came to me and was talking about one of my recruiters and said, so-and-so is spending too much time on each one of her calls. How is she going to get 75 calls out a day if she's spending 10 minutes with every person she talks to? And I'm like, how is she supposed to get to know what drives somebody to make a job change, or what kind of position they're looking for, or if they are a cultural personality fit for the company, if she spends anything less than 30 minutes on the phone with somebody? But he was so obsessed with getting 75 calls a day, which was in part one of the reasons that, Nicole and I left, is because he didn't get it.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to something you said. You said that metrics are they're essential or they're needed. Why is that? Because I know that there are some within industry for their medical affairs teams, their field medical, they don't have metrics. So and they're successful at their job, their organization, they bring tremendous value. So why do you think metrics are essential?
Well, I mean, it goes back to something you said earlier and using them as a diagnostic tool. If your MSL is not bringing in any interest in IITs, or they're not helping provide information to your VivaBox or whatever you're using, that's going to share insights that will impact the strategy. If you're not seeing those things happen, how are you going to be able to reverse engineer and figure out why is this maybe not happening? And if it's that they didn't talk to more than 5 people in a month's time, maybe that's why. So when I say metrics, I mean they need to be tracked, but I'm not saying they should be a quota.
Okay, all right, so that I'm aligned with you there, right? So let's think about it. So who are we sharing these reports with? When you think about, like, if you're going to go make a presentation in front of the CEO or the president, think about where they typically the majority, I would say, of these leaders come from. They usually come from a sales background, right? So we will never win that conversation when we're talking about the number of people that we're interacting with, right? So I think even some of the more aggressive, or those that have very high bars for their MSL teams, from an engagement standpoint, 300 something for the entire year. I've heard that number before. That still doesn't compare to what an average salesperson would see on a monthly basis or yearly basis as well too. So going and saying, hey, my MSL team for Q1 saw an average of 60 people in this quarter. Well, I mean, what do you think that the response is going to be? Well, my sales team usually will see 60 people in 1 week. So what are your thoughts?
Well, one thing came to mind. I was actually talking to somebody who worked at an unnamed big pharma yesterday. And one of his current complaints about his company is that they just raised their metrics from like 240 a year to 300. And I know for a fact that in 2000, I'm dating myself, like 2007, that company's annual metric was 720. And I told him that. I said, you're probably not going to believe this, but your company's metric was 720 a year back then. And it was more like just conversation and sort of a ha-ha, you should have seen it back then. But the reality of the conversation we were having was this company back in 2007 had very primary care kind of products. So
Okay.
they had, I almost said the drug name. I'm trying not to name the company, but they had they had a blood thinner, and they had a hypertension product, and they had a type 2 diabetes product, and they had like an antidepressant. And so that was their market then. It was in many ways primary care. Today, their products are oncology and rare neurology and rare autoimmune disease. So in that regard, 240 is, I think, fairly reasonable, and 300 is crazy. For rare disease, 300 in a year? I mean, how many specialists are in some of these special areas? So, and I think that actually kind of trails off, but it was just kind of an interesting conversation about how things change depending on, I think that's the point of when you're talking about goals. What's your goal? And let's go backwards to figure out what that number should be, because it's not the same as with a hypertension drug.
It's this fine line in ways. I mean, I think that we want to push our people to make impact. Sometimes we don't know how to communicate that, or we become fixed from metric fixation. We talk that we want to stretch our people and really set high bars to see if they can be achieved in ways too. So when we think about the stretch goals, though, the tendency is to go the activity standpoint and the number of people that you can engage versus the quality of information that you can get, or the impact of the relationships and development of new opportunities or connections. I mean, MSLs are the bridge, the scientific bridge from the healthcare provider to the organization, right? But that can be multiple areas. I mean, it could be, obviously, we have the speaker, they could be a commercial speaker, they could be in clinical or support clinical development, they could do publications, the list goes on and on and on. Those are value adds that can really drive business success versus sitting in a hallway waiting to shake hands and kiss babies. I mean, just for my numbers' sake, that does not tell me anything as far as the impact that's being made. It may give me a peace of mind that I'm paying somebody and not just sitting at home doing nothing. I think sometimes we raise metrics because there's a lack of trust in our people as well too, which is another topic in itself. So I think if we utilize metrics in the right place to help us get to the goal that we want to get to, and then report on the goal versus the activity that drove it, that can be very secondary if you're really coming up with qualitative, quantified information, right? So how are we stretching the people? How are we working towards that? And what are we asking them to do? And I think we can just find ourselves in a very dangerous spot if we focus on this purely from a metric standpoint, as far as the number of people engaged, right? So I know for this podcast, we're not going to talk about solutions to that. It's really just kind of addressing what's the driver of metrics. I know we'll talk about that in upcoming episodes. But anyway, I think that this is an important topic that we often get stuck on. It's interesting. He goes on in the book, and I've got it listed here. I don't know it by memory, so I'll have to read some of it. But it talks about how to use metrics effectively. And I thought I would just share. I think that listeners, if you don't have a chance to read the book, you can hear this. So he really lists seven different things, right? So first is complement and not replace. That's what metrics are, how they can be utilized effectively. He says metrics should complement and not replace judgment based on personal experience. Use them alongside qualitative assessments. So when you use it in context as a complement, it can be beneficial. Context matters. Consider the context in which metrics are applied. Not everything worth measuring can be quantified. Very interesting.
What's an example of that one?
Not everything that gets measured can be quantified.
Yeah. It's like almost putting the insight itself on a rating scale.
That's right. So if they can, if I would say that actually goes back to insights and wellness too, right? If you can get a clear understanding an identification of a significant gap. Potentially, maybe it's in the data based off of the initial readouts. Advisory boards can be a great example. Those are very small, a small group of people that could lead to a tremendous impact and shape the business, right? So that's another example of where qualitative information is highly regarded compared to it having to be quantified. It goes on to say what gets measured, be cautious about what you measure. Not everything that can be measured is worth measuring. Based off of your conversations with any of your hiring managers or organizations, can you think of a metric that's probably not worth measuring?
Probably gonna have to think about that a little bit, maybe get back to you.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that's a really thought-provoking question. I'm gonna think about that and get back to you.
Okay. He goes on and talks about quality over quantity, something we always try to talk about, but I think we don't have a full grasp on how to communicate that. I've got some ideas about that. We can talk about that maybe on another time, but talking about quality over quantity, prioritize quality over quantity, focus on meaningful metrics rather than excessive number of indicators, right? So you don't need 15 different things that you need to measure. Maybe there's just 3 or 4 things that you can really pack a punch, if you will. Avoid distortions. Metrics can distort behavior. Be aware of unintended consequences such as gaming the stats or teaching to the tests. I think that's pretty thought-provoking. That's what we talked about earlier. Transparency and accountability. That's another good thing for it can be used effectively. Metrics enhance transparency and accountability when used appropriately. And then finally, it says balance with human judgment. Metrics work best when used in conjunction with human judgment and expertise. I can think about a time, I was having a conversation with a field leader the other day. Each quarter they have to report their metrics. The report that they show actually shows the estimated amount or the anticipated amount of interactions, and the number of HCPs, the number of interactions, the number of what's the other? The number of people, not the number of engagements, the number of people engaged, and then the number that were pre-identified, like they were on a focus list, if you will. Okay. That was it. So they had all these predictors, and then right next to it, they had a column of how the team performed. Now, in this scenario, this was for the entire team. So they had three new MSLs that were in the process of training in the midst at the same time. They were cross-training onto another expanded label. So they were out of the field. It was something that was clearly communicated that this is part of the plan to make sure they were set up to succeed. Knowing that they only were going to be in the field for 30 or a small percentage of time, the estimated numbers were still the same as if they were in the field the entire time. The numbers came back lower than what that was. And so the scorecard showed that the team did not meet the expectations of what was, or I guess they didn't meet the expectations. And so then it became a justification of what did your team do when they were so rigid in what was estimated, they wouldn't flex the numbers too. So it's kind of like, why, if you don't use judgment and you can't speak to those, if those are the end all be all versus to help supplement the great work that's being done, it can just lead to frustration. It can lead to the dumbing down the value potentially that the teams bring to. So anyway, I think that the checklist that he provides, complement, context matters, what gets measured, quality over quantity, avoiding distortions, utilizing it truly as an indicator versus the core, I think is key. And so how do we do that? I think that probably sets up tees up another topic for another time, but what are your thoughts?
Okay, so so you asked me, is there a metric that we're measuring? And by we, I mean y'all, because we're talking about MSLs, not recruiters, but that we're measuring why are we measuring it? And so this is just me wondering, so I would love to, this is really kind of more of a question back to you. Because
Don't MSL me.
yeah, sorry. But there are some candidates that I've talked to that have said, I'm required to be in the field 3 days a week. And so I've thought about that a little bit, and I'm kind of wondering if you're already requiring them to see X number of thought leaders a month or a week, let's just say we break down to a week, why do you also then have to say, you also have to leave your house 3 days a week? If there was a way to have all of those meaningful conversations in 2 days. So I'm just curious your thought on why we would give them number of interactions as well as you have to leave the house 3 days a week.
So I would say again, this is just the thoughts of Chad Fellers. I don't have there's I'm not speaking for anyone else, just my experience on this. I think I talked about this earlier. Sometimes we put these things in, we raise it because it's a lack of trust. So in this scenario, right? If we're not assuming positive intent, or if we've been burned in the past, we may feel like, what happens if, okay, so what if you got 30 people together, or you went to a conference and you saw all of your targets at one conference, you knocked them out in one day or one weekend. And so I've met my numbers for the month, or I've met it for the quarter. So there's no need for me to continue to be out there. So it is a trust. I mean, can I figure out how to leverage all that and then have a bunch of free time? I think that's the concern. And so trying to make sure that doesn't happen. It's okay. No, you need to be out doing something. Again, it's to help. It's to help. I think our internal stakeholders feel like they're getting a good return on investments. I'm of the philosophy of, look, if you can get if you need an average of 10, or I can tell you when I was first started MSLing several years ago, a long time ago, I had a great boss who was like, okay, I don't care how you do it. It's just this, the expectation is to engage this many people. So I would fly in, I would see people at lunch, at dinner, and then I would do it in a day and a half and be done. I would get all of my things done, where there are some MSLs that would spread it out the entire week. It just worked for me and my family to be more efficient in that way, and I was able to be successful and do it. It had no bearing on how successful I was based on the number of days I was out in the field, right? So it can be done, and I would challenge people that have those in place. The question is, why do we have it? And be open and honest about it.
So this is another thing that's kind of come up in some MSL conversations when people are talking about things they're frustrated with, is if I have dinner with 3 doctors from the same practice, or if I go to meet with my KOL and he introduces me, or she, sorry, probably she, introduces me to 2 other ACPs in their practice, they can only count that as one interaction. When they may have very well influenced, I'm sorry, not allowed to influence, provided education to 3 different providers that might ultimately impact patient care. why would you not count all 3 of them? Maybe
Yeah,
that's just a rhetorical question.
I think
Well, my last comment that I'll make in my series of interruptions of you today, is I think I'm gonna say we, even though I'm not an MSL,
the
or I'm
royal we.
not an MSL director, but I think we are letting MSLs down by, the new ones that come in, and this is how they're being taught that they're valuable. I think it's also what's leading some MSLs to want to move into different roles than being MSLs, because they feel like they are being gamified. They feel like their impact is not being felt, and they want to transition into, almost all of them want to be in a medical affairs sort of strategy driven role, because they don't feel like their impact is valued. And so they're struggling to try to find a place in their world where they do feel like they're making progress. And that's not all MSLs, because thankfully not all companies are metrics for no reason kind of people or companies. But I think by and large, the ones that I am talking to that want to do something different, they coincidentally are not in those kinds of situations.
I think you teed up a great topic, a follow-up topic for maybe one of our next podcasts, or what are some different ways or different measures that we can report back, or what are ways to do that? What might that look like? I'm a dreamer, so I'm happy to share some thoughts. Maybe we can have a guest maybe at some point as well too. Maybe we can get some feedback on our page too about different ideas of what type of metrics you would like, measurements you would like to see reported internally. So I think that'd be a great conversation. What do you think?
I agree. I just wrote it down.
Love it. Mary, I always love our time together. Thanks for making yourself available. By the way, I love your comment earlier this week on LinkedIn. What was it? It was resting murder face.
Okay, now look, that was Patrina.
Yeah.
That was posted the video about how to try to avoid resting murder face.
I want to commend you. You've done a good job in today's episode, right? I have not seen it.
I'm giving props to Patrina, because I'm like, wow, I need to be more cognizant of that. So yeah, I definitely, you can ask anybody who knows me. I have the face.
Stank face. Oh, you're funny. I'm just messing. It's always fun. It's always good to talk. Thank you so much for a good conversation on metrics. I hope our listeners enjoyed this. Listeners, thank you for tuning in again with us, where leaders develop one another. So until next time, we will see you around. Make sure you are measuring the right things. Have a good day.